Excusez-moi, on attend un peu le... Bonsoir. La conférence ce soir aura lieu en anglais. So I will introduce Professor Lampugnani in my bad English, I'm sorry. Professor Lampugnani, you are very welcome tonight at Archizoom at TPFL in the context of this exhibition called Pieces of Evidence. An exhibition on the periphery that becomes a city, taking Lausanne West as an example, a living example in which we are part of it. When we were thinking with the curators of the exhibition, Ariane Widmer and Laurette Cohen, about the possible lecturers that we could invite for this series on the question of the periphery, we thought very quickly, in fact, about you as one of the most influential contributor to the understanding of contemporary city planning because of both your theoretical work and your practice in Milan. You are Italian with, as we say in French, I don't know if we say this in English, you have 1 foot in Italy, 1 foot in Germany, and actually a 3rd foot in Switzerland. You have studied architecture in Rome and Stuttgart, and you are now full professor at the ETH for the chair of the history and urban design. At the same time, you've been invited professor in Harvard, in Frankfurt, in Pamplona, in Spain, and at the Polytechnical in Milan. As a theoretician, you do a lot of research, and I would tell a few titles of the many books you have written. For example, the Encyclopedia of the 20th Century Architecture, Architektur als Kultur, die Ideen und die Formen, A History of German Modern Architecture, Stadtformen, die Architektur der Stadt zwischen Imagination und Konstruktion, and more recently, die Stadt im 20. Jahrhundert, in 2 volumes. This last book is on display in the exhibition. You've been a curator of major exhibitions like Das Abenteuer der Ideen, Architektur und Philosophie seit der industriellen Revolution for the Neue Nationalgalerie in Berlin, and La Città Immaginate, Un viaggio in Italia in the Palazzo della Triennale, sorry for my Italian, to name just 2 of them. No, I don't think so. In 1990 and for 5 years, you've been director of the DAM, the Deutschen Architecture Museum in Stuttgart. And you have also been a scientific advisor for the IBA, the Internationalen Bauausstellung in Berlin in 1980 until 84. As a writer, you've been contributor in Casabella, Domus, and the Harvard Design Museum. And at least but not last, your Studio di Architettura in Milano built, among other, an office building in Berlin, the entrance square of the Audi factory in Ingolstadt, the famous urban design planning of the Novartis campus in Basel, and now I think you are working on the one in Shanghai. I guess it's a lifelong project. And the master plan of Richti Areal in Wallisellen, which will be part of the lecture tonight. So, Professor Lampugnani, we are very honored to hear you tonight, and thank you for your presence. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Now it works a lot. I'm very pleased to be here. I thank you very much for your invitation. And it's always nice to come from Zurich to Lausanne. I was told to do this in English, which is probably part of the globalization because I'm an Italian teaching in German in Zurich and coming to Lausanne and then speaking English. But that's how it works, and I'll try to do my my best. What I would like to do is to show you very briefly, or to give you very briefly, my really slightly polemical ideas about about Suburbia today, and explain a little bit why they are in a way they are. Show you also some research that we are doing on or some results of the research that we're doing at my chair in Zurich, and then show you a project which in a way is one endeavor to change a little bit the periphery. So it's a lot of things, and yes, we will I think manage. Let me see. When we talk about the city, we're talking about very many things, and basically about two basic models. This, we would say, is a city. It's part of a city. It's a view of the center of Zurich. But this is also a city. It's also a view of Zurich. It's just a bit shifted and on a larger on a larger scale. Or if we go a little bit more into detail, we could say that this is part of a city. This is a street. In fact, it's the Bahnhofstraße in Zurich. Or we could say this is a street. It's still in Zurich. It's a street a little bit more outside of Zurich. So we have these two models, and normally we are told that, of course, there are these two models, and we have the old city, the compact city, and then we have the more diffuse city, the suburban development, which is the city of the last, let's say, 40 years, and in any case, the real contemporary city, and possibly the city of the future. And this has been told us, and there are many studies on that. Some of them are on the table there. Sieberts, for instance, with his Zwischenstadt, the city in between, that has studied this phenomenon in a very intelligent, what I consider a very intelligent way, or the generic city by Rem Koolhaas. There are many studies concentrating on this, and in a way trying to make us believe or explain to us that this is almost in a solipsistic way is the necessary development, the necessary outcome of the history of the city, and there are good reasons for that. Of course, one of the reasons is the enormous expansion of population. We need to house very many people, the expansion of infrastructure, and so on. So there is let's say, a canonical history of modern city expansion. One must say Suburbia is, of course, not an invention of our time. It's not even an invention of the 19th or the 20th century. There has always been a place outside the city, outside classical Rome. There was the place where there were the ville suburbane, where we have also the word, and there have always been places, edges of the city that have been partially urbanized, but the real development of the suburbs starts, of course, in the 19th century, where we have this expansion of population, where we have the modernization, the change of production methods, and And the first model for this expansion of the city in the 19th century is, or one of the first models. There are of course others. Is Ebenezer Howard with his garden city, who developed the idea of a cellular growth of a city, and actually of a new strategy of urbanization that would take the place of the historical city that was dirty, non-social, oppressing, and obsolete, and that would start a new way of life in the country. You remember the three magnets: town, country, and then town, country. So the combination of the two in the garden city with a lot of green space. This is a scheme that he produced in 1902. And this is an advertisement of his first garden city, Letchworth, showing this real alternative to the city. So it's based on single-family housing or row housing, a lot of green, a lot of nature, sports, healthy people, a completely different way of life, and it did happen. This is Letchworth in the late 60s, and you can see immediately it's a completely different type of building than the historical city that we've seen in the very beginning. It's small houses, mostly one-family houses with a lot of green, but it's still a city. I mean, it's a real city. It's an independent city. It's meant to be an independent city. It has its infrastructure. It has industry. It has public buildings. It has school. It has everything that is necessary for a city. And from this point on, in a way, let's say the city extensions happened in such a way. This is an example from Germany. It's the Römerstadt by Ernst May. So these Siedlungen of the 20s took some ideas of the garden city movement. It's quite different because those are not independent cities. They are somehow attached to a central city, in this case Frankfurt. But it's still the idea of having a lot of green and of distributing building in the green area. This was enhanced, especially in Germany, but not only in Germany, after the Second World War, by the destruction that was in fact partially also accepted in good spirit, because it was what was called a kind of mechanical opening up. The German wording is even nicer: mechanische Auflockerung. So something that in a way got rid of the overdensity of the 19th century city, and so in the ruins or near the ruins of the city of the 19th century, the new rural cities could grow, and they then mutated. Of course, I'm concentrating this history. Then they mutated in the so-called Großsiedlungen. We are staying in Frankfurt. It's not Weststadt, where a very important population settled in bigger structures. I think I have, yes, in bigger structures, as you can see here from this in these aerial photographs, but still in a mixed open buildings and in a lot of greenery. And then the step to this is not very far away. This is one of the many urbanizations. This is in Nevada that we have in the United States, where the single-family houses, get so close together, then there is not much green, as you can see, but it's also not a real city. So this is in a way one, let's say, one of the history, or the classical history of city extension. What happens when the compact small city of medieval times, of the Renaissance, explodes because of the pressure of the population and needs to expand. I would like to tell you, to sketch another history of modern city extension, starting from almost from the same period. In the 19th century, where, for instance, an engineer named Ildefonso Cerdà first started to do a survey of the city of Barcelona, and then developed this city extension plan. Here you have the old the core of Barcelona, and this is his extension plans, a very huge plan for a lot of people, that completely changes the structure of the city and also the type of dwelling. It has a lot of it was supposed actually to have a lot of green. You can see that the buildings, only the dark lines are buildings. In the middle, there would be open courtyard, and this was his idea of a city development that still is a city. It has streets, it has squares, it has a very clear structure. It came out a little bit differently. This is the view of Barcelona. Today you can see that his blocks have been built over, the courtyards are not there anymore, but you can see that the structure of his expansion plan is still valid. And this was an expansion done for exactly the same reasons of Howard's Garden City strategy, to house a lot of, let's say, new dwellers, and to house them in such a way that they could escape the very tight, dark, unhealthy historical city. Or the plan that James Hobrecht drew up for Berlin, a plan that has been very much criticized. In my view, it's quite an interesting plan, because this was in the middle of the 19th century. This was the built substance of Berlin. It had a little less than 1 million people, and his plan was meant for about 4 million people. So it was a real important extension. He drew up this plan. He has become notoriously famous or Berlin has then became notoriously famous for the very dense construction with the so-called Mietskasernen, with the blocks. This is the most terrifying example that one can find. It's Meyerhof of the 70s, of the 19th century. A quite grim structure of one building after the other. One in the back of the street with very small courtyards, very poor housing conditions. But it's not the only way to go about let's say a dense city expansion. Approximately at the same time, Alfred Messel built his block on the Weissenbachstraße, which is called a reformed block. That is a block with an open courtyard. The courtyard looked like this, so it was a nice place where children played, as you can see. And the later blocks that he did still in Berlin in the 90s show more open structure, very clear design, and quite attractive inner, let's say, worlds that can also be connected to each other. This is Rimas Hofgarten, it's still in Berlin. And I show it only to show you the different, let's say, modulation of this, let's say, dense city city expansion. The question is, which model should we pursue? And also to understand a little bit more about these two histories and these two models, we have to go back to the main idea of suburbia, or the main idea of the garden center, which has been explained probably in the best book of a colleague of ours, Robert Brickman, who's written a book on suburbia. He comes to a completely different conclusion than I do, but he explains very clearly how, in a way, the idea of suburbia was to have a castle with a park, and once you have a mass society, and once you have also a democratic society, of course, you cannot. It's not anymore for just a few people, but it's for a mass society. So the model shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And now this is my interpretation, not Robert Brookman's interpretation. It shrinks to that. That is then what remains of the castle, and what you see around it is what remains of the park. It can be, of course, interpreted as a correct democratization of a situation. Nobody wants to have just a few castles and nothing else, but it is of course a difficult model to pursue. This is a cartoon. This is an interesting cartoon. Well, first of all, I think it's quite witty, but it's a cartoon of the 40s. It's called "The Masked Builder Strikes Again," and obviously it shows the destruction of the landscape by this machine that is eating trees and spitting out houses. The interesting thing is who is using this, because it's not. I didn't discover it myself. I rediscovered it because the man who used it in one of his books is Victor Grün. We have the name in common, but not much more. And Victor Grün is he was an Austrian immigrant to the United States, and he's, in a way, he can be defined as the inventor of the shopping mall. And Grün first accepted completely. He has a really interesting, also theoretical evolution. First, he accepted completely suburbia, so the new developments, in the United States, and said the only problem that they have is they need a kind of center, and the center is a shopping mall. And he invented, in a way, these shopping malls that are not only shopping malls, but where you have also other activities. You have childcare, you have a movie theater, and so on. And after being extremely successful in these shopping malls, he decided or understood or thought that this was a bad development. He then wrote an important article, "The Sad Story of the Shopping Mall," and in one of his books where he tries to explain the development of this of suburbia, he uses this cartoon, which I very happily reuse. In any way, the consequence of this, let's say, letting go of the city, opening it up, are these words here. Of course, it's also part of the infrastructure. This is Zurich. It could also be probably here or wherever near Milan. It doesn't really matter. And the endeavors then to say we are building a city here, a city is existing. This is again in Zurich. Remain a little bit, let's say, ambiguous. Now you can say all this is very nice. These images are not so bad after all, and they are quite attractive. And we know a lot of artists and movie people who have used the fascination of these places, starting with on the architectural side with Robert Venturi. But we have also to ask us: is this a solution that works for a big population? Is this a solution that is a strategy? Is a good strategy for the development of a city? We have, or one could say, this is not such a bad solution after all. This I show for patriotic reasons because I'm from Rome, so this is the center from Rome. Is a plan of Giambattista Nolli. Is a typical plan in a way of one of the most evolved historical center that one can find. So one of the historical centers that were the enemies, both in a way of Ebenezer Howard and his people, but also of Cerdà and Hobrecht and the 19th century city expanders. But in a way, if you look at this, it has a lot of what I consider advantages. It has a very clear and nice system of public spaces that Nolli draw in white, so you can discover them very well, including the spaces, the interiors of the churches and the courtyards of the palaces, which at that time were not public, but you could access them, you could enter them at the time. He shows in gray the private space, so he makes a very clear distinction, and the system of public space, and there is nothing in between, basically. It's very clear cut. And the public space is a very fine and complex network of spaces, spaces where people can go, can have activities, where public life can develop. And I suspect that this can still be. Not I suspect, I'm convinced that this is still a model that, of course, we cannot reproduce, we cannot imitate. It has also a lot of drawbacks. Some streets are very narrow, some houses are very high, some places are very dark. But one that is, in a way, the basis, or can be the basis, also of a future city development. Or, to put it a little bit more polemically, I think this is a much more progressive city than the periphery images that we've just seen. We were curious to understand what density is. We were interested in density, but we were curious to understand what density really is. And so we looked at, this was done with my chair in Zurich, we looked at some typical, let's say, urban typologies or urban conditions from Swiss cities, and looked at them how they are, basically, did a photograph, this is a plan, and we always noted what the density was. I'm talking only of the density of people living there, or the residential density. There are many other densities, of course, contacts and workspace and so on. This is just to make it simple and comparable. It was just a matter of looking at the density of the residents. And you can see these figures here. This is around 150. It was just to get an idea of, this is a little bit more, this is 200, this is a slab. This is a new, more modern development. It reaches 280. These are towers in Basel that are not very high, but especially they have big spaces between each other, so they are lower, 118. This is a nice environment in Zurich with single standing houses with certain more apartments in one houses. It's about 200. This is about the same, a little bit more than 200. This goes higher, 200 and 60 is a block in Zurich, but rather low houses. This is a block with higher houses. It comes to 230. This is again a block, a little bit denser. It comes to 314. It was just for us a way to understand what density is about. How, what can you reach with different typologies, and of course what kind of qualities you attain on the streets, in the courtyards, around the houses, and it was, I must say, it was quite surprising because there was really some quarters like this one that did not give us an idea of density, of being oppressive, where we found out that there was quite a number of people were able to live in this space. Why this interest in density? To make it short, there's a few issues why I think that density is something that we cannot avoid. Putting houses together, putting people together, enhances communication, and it's also good for a mixture, when you have a mixture of function, when you don't have only residential but also workspaces and jobs. It is economically much more. It has much. It has a lot of advantages from the economical point of view, both in terms of the, let's say, of the individual, because of course living in the periphery seems cheaper because the rents are cheaper, but traveling back and forth costs a lot of time and also a lot of money. And for the society, a compact city is much less expensive than a city made of single-family houses. For instance, only the cost of keeping the infrastructure, so the sewage, water, electricity, and so on, is about double in Suburbia than it is in a compact city. And then I think what is really very important is the ecological issue. I think we just cannot afford to consume so much landscape as we still are consuming. I mean, Switzerland is a very positive example, but this terrifying figure of 1 square meter per second, that's what we are consuming in Switzerland in terms of landscape, and I think it's quite unacceptable. So these are, again, very briefly, maybe we can discuss it a little bit more afterwards, why we have such an interest in density. There are also cultural aspects, but we will talk about that maybe later. And finally, I would like to show you one intervention that we did in the periphery, where we tried to show that it's possible to build a dense city also in the periphery. To make it clear, we did also this analysis of different situations because we do not believe that there is one dense, typology of a dense city. We don't believe that it's row houses or blocks or so on. We think there is a big range of possibilities, and in fact, we think that history, the history of the city, shows or offers a big choice also, or big set of inspiration of how to find different solution to this question. The project that I would like to show you, again briefly, is situated here. It's, if you have the city here and the airport, it's in this axis of the airport. So it's a place that is developing very fast in Zurich. It's a so-called Glatttal. Richtig is situated about here, but it's not Zurich anymore. It's outside the city. And if you look at the site as it was before we started the project, it's really suburbia. No, it's really suburbia at its best. It has so this is Wallisellen, and Wallisellen is a village. They also call themselves a village, and they speak our village, Wallisellen, but it's of course very near Zurich. So you have all these small houses here. Here you have a new development. Mostly office buildings. This is a shopping mall. It's a Glattzentrum. All this here you see the parking garage. It's quite large, and it's they say it's the most successful shopping center of Europe. I couldn't check it, but it seems to work. Here you have a street. Here you have the station. Here you have the highway. So it's really suburbia, and a lot at our disposal was this one. It was a industrial site, dismissed, completely cleaned up, and empty. Has stayed empty for a long time. There was a competition. The requirements were interesting and I think also intelligent. It was about 50-50 residential and workspaces. Actually, quite a number of workspaces were required. The site is. To give you a rough idea, it's about 70,000 square meters, or 7 hectares, and the requirement was to house about 1,000 people here and give among about the same number, a little bit more of workspaces, just very roughly, and there was also to build the park should also be part was also part of the program. What we tried to do was, well, the first thing that we said is we cannot do the park because it's too small. We prefer to have the park in, and also because it's too exposed in all this mess of streets. We want the park to be inside the buildings, or inside the quarter. And we want to do a kind of autonomous quarter linked to the context, but with its own square, with its own streets, with its own structure. This was the very first sketch. This is the competition drawing. It's a collage, actually. As you can see, the park is not our design. It's by Lenné or by Lenôtre, and also the plans, the housing plans. We did really a collage by Kai Fiska and Bruno Taut. And because it was about, first of all, it was about an urban idea. And the urban idea is basically to have a connection between the station that is here. This I forgot to tell you because it was not in the first image. This is the so-called Glattalbahn. It's a tramway connecting Zurich with this periphery, and it has a station here. So we decided to have the street. It's getting paler and paler. A street connecting the two things. In the middle, a square, and then another connection to this Glattzentrum, to this shopping mall, which is very, very much populated. And we were in what we tried to do, or what was our interest, was to create really two different words, to create a very urban word outside in the public domain. This is our first idea of the square, and to create a very private and green and bucolic and park natural atmosphere in these big courtyards. Again, it is not a new idea. It was done in the 20th century, in the 19th century. We try to interpret it in a little bit different way. This is, oops, I didn't want that. This is the final plan. It changed quite a lot. As you can see, we closed the blocks towards the railway, and we created, through the same design or through the same language, let's say, of landscaping, we really tried to connect this courtyards with each other, so that you should have a feeling, or will have a feeling, hopefully, that it is a kind of continuous park, only fragmented in this different building. This is already quite detailed. You can see the blocks, and you can see also the first design of the public spaces. Briefly, the system of the traffic. Yellow is car traffic, orange is only pedestrian, so it's a connection between the courtyards. These are the courtyards. We couldn't do this because the developer, it's a private development, it's a speculation, needed this area for a big shop, for shops. This is a sketch of the uses. So this blue here is residential, and this yellow is offices. We decided to divide the blocks so that they would be basically monofunctional. This is a mixed block, and what you see here are the uses on the ground floor, and you can see the light blue are shops. So the ground floors should be activated through shops, restaurants, cafes, and so on. Since we were interested in density, we tried to find out through 3D models how high the buildings could be. You can see here an experiment with 3 floors, an experiment with 4 floors, and we really wanted to try to understand how the spaces would look like, and hopefully also feel. So these were the first experiments to establish the height of the building, if you want, the density, as a basis then for the change of the planning rules for this area, which of course were completely different. And then we started designing the public spaces, or to be more precise, the plot was, or the single blocks were divided under different architects, because we thought it was too large to do it all ourselves, and also to do it, with one handwriting, and we reserved for us immodestly the largest residential block. The largest because I wanted the largest, and the residential because I think it's interesting, or it interested me more. And then we started designing the public spaces, because we were really interested mostly in the public spaces. So the main square here, and it was really the first thing that was designed and established. We used historical references, again, quite immodest, Place Dauphin, and we used them not because we think we can, reproduce, or we want to reproduce Place Dauphin in Wallisellen, of all places, but to understand the proportion. And I think also that historical references are the best way to really understand the interaction between the social structure and the built structure, because they've worked for many, many years. So this was the reference. This is then our design of the main square, with a few trees. We were interested in a place that really can be used, with a fountain, and this is our idea of how it should look like once it's finished. Here already mounted the different designs by different architects. This is Villares here. This is Max Dudler. Then we designed the main streets, the so-called Richtige Arcade. It had to have shops. We wanted an arcade. We looked at many arcades in Turin, for instance, just to understand the proportions, how it works. And this is then the section of the street that we established. The arcade is here. It's a bit smaller than the one in Turin, but it's still not. I mean, it's 4 meters wide, so we think it's okay. Asymmetrically, it has a row of big trees. This is how the cars will go and park. And you may be bored by this, this detailing of materials and Farben here and so on. We think it's absolutely crucial. We think that having a good curbstone is absolutely important for a good. I mean, it's not all in urban design, but you need to detail it down to the curbstone. And this is how we envisaged it again at the very beginning. And then we had a second typology of streets, so-called the minor streets, that were not meant for traffic, for through traffic, only for people living there. Wohnstraßen, and those are these 3 streets here. There we wanted to have gardens towards the streets. This is an example from where I live in Milan. So it was not difficult to find it. And this is a section, again, much more modest, of the streets. They don't have sidewalks. We don't need sidewalks there. We have this garden. You can put the bikes here. These are the lamps that are, again, different from the lamps where you have real traffic. And this is how the whole thing could work. And to finish, I show you just quickly the progress that we are making, or that we made with our blog, that we considered a little bit kind of I mean, it's not an example, but it's a kind of model of how these residential blocks could work. It's rather large. These are about 130 meters in length, so it's really a big garden in the middle. This is studies of the facade these are studies of the street facade, so of the urban facade that we wanted to be closed and urban. And this is the facade towards the courtyard where the apartments open up with loggias and balconies and so on. This is a basic plan. I show it only for this because we were really interested in having always one room, of course, the living room, going from one side to the other, in order that in every apartment, or in almost every apartment, we didn't manage it every apartment, but in almost every apartment, you have both the urban side of the environment and the more quiet and private side. These are the apartments where we didn't manage to do it, but we have very large balconies here, and it's very nice because it's on the south side. These are the maisonette, so we had a problem of there was always this problem, how you put apartments in the ground floor, so we have a Hochparterre, and in the ground floor we have only maisonette. And this is how the building looks from, of course, looking now that this is the urban side, obviously. So it has the arcade, as I said. It has shops. We are now developing a system of how the shops should advertise in order to get a little bit of order there, and this is a very simple. This is stone. This is plaster. A very simple facade, slightly French inspired, and this is the facade towards the other streets, so the normal, not the so urban streets, where we allow the facade to open up with loggia, and where the whole facade is much more simple and subdued, let's say. And this is the courtyard, and with this I would like to finish because I would like to show you, or I wanted to show you also the courtyard, because you see the nature that has become so important in the 19th century, and that I consider also an important asset for the quality of life, can be also saved in projects that are urban, that are dense, and that are really city. And I think that I don't think that this is the solution. It's probably one solution, but I think that new developments in the periphery or in suburbia should not consider themselves different from an intervention in the city. We need to have cities that are different typologically, but where there is no difference in the quality of living between the center and the outskirts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Les questions peuvent être en français, italien, allemand, anglais.
Est-ce que vous connaissez la densité de ça par rapport aux chiffres que vous aviez regardés dans les autres exemples avec les fiches d'habitants au mètre carré et aussi la surface par habitant?
Là, c'est à peu près 210 habitants par hectare. C'est un peu difficile de le faire ici, je dois dire, parce que c'est, comme je disais, c'est un mix residential et offices. Alors c'est un peu plus on peut pas calculer comme exactement, mais c'est comparable, disons, à le quartier de blocs que j'ai montré de Zurich, autour de 200, un peu plus de 200. Si on met aussi les bureaux, alors c'est plus que ça, mais ça c'est pas un compte qui marche. Mais c'est une densité, disons, d'une ville normale, suisse, et une densité très bien baisse.
Peut-être une autre question. Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas qu'aujourd'hui, il y a la surface par habitant, elle est en train d'exploser et qu'on pourrait aussi imaginer de construire des appartements plus petits?
Oui, mais je pense que c'est très difficile de convaincre les gens d'habiter des appartements plus petits seulement pour avoir des villes plus densifiées. Et c'est aussi une question du marché, parce que ce sont des appartements qu'il faut vendre. Ça marche. Je dois dire ça aussi, ça a marché, ce projet s'est fait, se réalise parce qu'ils vendent ou ils louent les appartements.
Je peux poser la question. Où sont cachées les voitures?
Dans le sous-sol. Ici. Ouais. Sous chaque bloc a son parking, et on a laissé, ça a été une des luttes contre le développeur pour avoir un mètre de terrain pour pouvoir planter des arbres, de véritables arbres. Je peux vous dire exactement combien ça coûte, parce qu'on a nous dit ça plusieurs fois.
Je vais quand même amener le micro, comme ça la question peut être enregistrée.
Pourquoi est-ce que vous n'avez pas fait de système de parking silo, par exemple? De bâtiments parking?
Pourquoi on n'a pas fait parking silo?
Est-ce que c'était une volonté ou...
Oui, c'était une volonté, la mienne, disons, parce que je pense que c'est possible de le faire si on a un terrain vaste, mais mettre dire qu'un de ces, c'est un nombre très petit de blocs, dire qu'un de ces blocs est seulement pour les autos, ça détruit les quartiers, c'est trop petit. Et c'est très difficile, si vous avez un parking, c'est très difficile de faire quelque chose autour du parking parce que vous voyez les voitures. C'est pas fantastique. On peut le faire.
J'aurais une question sur la relation entre le travail de l'architecte, celui des investisseurs et puis celui du politique en fait. Comment s'est installée la relation, hein, parce que l'exposition thématise beaucoup ça en fait, l'importance du politique dans la gestion du territoire. Et puis là en l'occurrence, est-ce que c'est main libre complète pour les investisseurs ou est-ce qu'il y a une supervision du politique? Comment c'est élaboré ce processus?
Je peux dire, c'est très simple, aussi très pragmatique si vous voulez, parce que c'était un terrain vague qui est resté vague pour longtemps. Finalement, il a été acheté par L'Réal, c'est notre client. Il en fait ses concours, coordonné avec l'administration. Les résultats, il y a eu des débats sur la densité, le numéro des appartements, et des choses comme ça. Et les projets qu'on a fait a été coordonné naturellement avec notre client. Et la conséquence était qu'on devait on devait faire une Gestaltungsplan, c'est-à-dire un plan complètement nouveau, parce qu'on ne pouvait pas construire ça là. Et ça m'étonnait parce que la population a voté. Il y a eu un référendum, il y a eu une campagne. Avant le référendum, on nous dit qu'on faisait les blocs comme à Vienne dans les années 20, que je trouve un compliment, mais c'était pas l'intention. Et après, il y a eu cet référendum et une grande partie a voté pour. Surtout, je dois dire, parce que ça crée des postes de travail. Mais aussi parce qu'ils ont compris qu'ils ne sont pas les villages de Wallisellen, mais c'est Zurich.
Merci.
Vous nous dites que Suburbia n'existe pas. Vous nous dites qu'il faut intervenir et faire de la ville, si je comprends bien, dans Suburbia. Et vous nous posez aussi la question du modèle à choisir. Donc, finalement, pour vous, le choix du modèle de l'intervention dans la périphérie, c'est celui de la ville. C'est ce que j'ai bien compris, c'est ça?
Oui.
Mais donc, votre hypothèse est celle que la périphérie, à terme, puisse devenir un morceau de ville comme Rome est comme Rome est une ville, ou quel genre de ville pensez-vous qu'on peut faire dans une Suburbia qui existe malgré tout aujourd'hui, en tout cas?
C'est une question très difficile. Non, oui, alors, je pense que, avant tout, chaque ville moderne, disons, est une sorte de patchwork de différents morceaux. Et ça, c'est une richesse. Et ça, c'est une chose que je trouve absolument positive. Mais je pense que chaque intervention qu'on fait maintenant, aujourd'hui, doit avoir une densité raisonnable, c'est-à-dire bien haute. Je suis pas favorable normalement. C'est assez difficile maintenant de donner. On ne peut pas donner des instructions comment on peut construire une ville. Mais je ne suis pas d'accord. Par exemple, à Zurich, il y a des discussions pour prendre Schwamendingen, qui est une sorte de ville-jardin des années 40, et la densifier. Et ça, je trouve complètement faux, parce que Schwamendingen n'est pas mon cup of tea. Je ne suis pas amoureux de Schwamendingen, j'habite pas à Schwamendingen. J'espère, je n'habiterai jamais à Schwamendingen. Mais non, franchement, non, je l'ai regardé bien, parce qu'on nous demandait une proposition pour la densifier. Et j'ai conclu qu'il ne faut pas la densifier, parce qu'elle a son charme, c'est la ville-jardin, c'est les espaces verts. Et il faut, si on change ça, c'est-à-dire il faut la garder, ou la détruire et construire une chose complètement nouvelle. Mais une chose à moitié serait, selon moi, une grande erreur. Pour répondre maintenant, finalement, à votre question, je pense que dans la périphérie, il y a des situations qu'il faut garder avec une densité baisse, parce qu'ils sont comme ça. S'ils ont une logique, s'ils ont aussi des qualités, il faut les garder comme ça. S'ils n'ont pas cette logique, s'ils ne sont pas des vrais projets, je pense que vite ou lentement, ça dépend de la situation économique et politique, il faut le substituer. C'est-à-dire il faut le détruire. Je pense qu'il faut avoir le courage de dire il y a des parties des villes, de la périphérie, qui ne sont pas bien, qu'il faut substituer.
Merci.
Merci.
Vittorio, moi je trouve très intéressant d'amener, disons, des fragments, parce que ce sera des fragments d'un système urbain qu'on connaît dans des morceaux de ville qui ont été en développement. C'est comme si on prenait un de ces petits quartiers de 3 îlots, de 4 îlots, et tout à coup, on les transpose dans un système autre. C'est ça qui m'intéresse quand même beaucoup dans cette démarche. Mais ça veut dire du coup que ces éléments deviennent presque des macro-objets dans des systèmes entourés de choses très différentes, disons, qui sont une autoroute, comme tu l'as dit, une voie de chemin de fer, un morceau d'industrie. Donc ils prennent quand même une autre signification en tant qu'une... Comment est-ce que tu vois ça, cette transposition, ce déplacement, en fait, et les qualités nouvelles qui pourraient naître du fait que c'est un fragment qui devient presque objet dans un autre contexte, oui. Quelle taille minimum faut-il pour cette transposition pour qu'il garde un caractère à la fois de ville et que comme fragment, il ait une nouvelle signification?
Tu sais, je n'ai pas peur de la différence. Je pense que les différences sont bien, et je pense aussi que les conflits entre, disons, notre projet et ce qui peut-être fait le groupe de crocodiles sont positifs. Ma préoccupation sont les infrastructures qui divident cette morceau. Pour le dire d'autre façon, c'est la connexion qu'on crée entre ces patchwork des morceaux de ville. Mais je dois dire, je suis aussi optimiste parce que, par exemple, quand on a commencé, peut-être je peux vous montrer très vite ça. Quand on a commencé ce projet, la situation était vraiment dramatique. Voilà, était vraiment dramatique. Bon, elle est toujours dramatique. Mais il y avait cette Winterthurer Straße et on nous a dit ça va devenir encore plus important et il faut faire une ponte, une passerelle entre le Glattzentrum et les Richti et notre quartier, mais une passerelle haute parce que ça c'est un viaduc. Il faut faire une passerelle parce qu'autrement les gens ne ne passera pas la rue, c'est impossible, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de trafic. J'étais là, je n'ai pas vu le trafic. Et après, il y a eu beaucoup de discussions. Et maintenant, c'est clair que ici, il y a très peu de trafic. Il ne faut pas la passerelle. On peut redessiner cet morceau de rue ici pour en faire une connexion à plat entre les glattes et notre quartier. Et peut-être on peut aussi éliminer ces viaducs. C'est pas trop clair, mais on peut les éliminer. Tu sais, il y a un peu il y a une phrase très jolie. C'est pas par Goethe, c'est pas Dorothy Sayers, où je pense que c'est Wimsey qui dit, vous savez, les faits sont comme les... Comment se dit les mouques, les vaches, sont comme les vaches. Si on les regarde dans les yeux pour longtemps, ils s'en vont. Et c'est un peu comme ça. Non? Il y a ces fêtes qui sont des fêtes accomplies, elles ne peuvent pas changer, sont les conditions du projet, et après elles changent. Et j'espère, je suis optimiste dans ça, vraiment, j'espère que qu'il y aura la possibilité de lier. Parce qu'une fois que ça est développé, si on développe aussi ça, on va créer des liens entre ces mondes, qui restent des mondes différents, je suis sûr, mais j'espère qu'ils vont être liés l'un avec l'autre. Ça est très important. Si on ne réussit pas ça, alors on a un problème.
Merci beaucoup. S'il n'y a plus de questions, je vous invite à poursuivre à l'apéritif. Et je vous souhaite une bonne fin de soirée. Merci beaucoup.